she was good, she was very, very good. But when she was bad, she was Veronica. My 9-year-old daughter just came into my office and told me that while watching TV, she saw the reflection of a skinny man with a long beard wearing a miner's helmet walk from our hallway into the kitchen and disappear. My husband is in bed and I was in the office the whole time. There was no one on the security cameras and she was very shaken up by it, so I believe she thinks she saw something. She isn't the kind of kid who makes stuff up or tells stories, and she was visibly shaken by what she saw. But here's the thing. This isn't the first time she's told me about seeing him. When she was 4, she was really upset about seeing a man with a hat and a beard walk behind one of our porch posts and disappear. There were also a couple of times she came to our room at night and complained about the man that won't stop laughing in her room when she was very young. I don't believe in ghosts, but this is really creeping me out, and it's taking an Oscar-worthy amount of acting to keep the kid from noticing. I should also note that we live in a historic gold rush/mining town. A few years back, I was awake, laying in bed. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I'm usually the first one awake in my house on the weekend, married, 3 kids. I remember this so vividly and clearly because we were in the middle of painting our bedroom and had the curtains off and the room was blindingly bright. I was awake in bed for about 10 minutes, just laying there, my wife asleep, thinking of the day ahead when I heard someone coming up the stairs. Our home is 120 years old, creaky original flooring. I've heard this sound hundreds of times from my room. Typical layout at the top of the stairs, one main hall with all our bedroom doors branching off, mine being the last one at the end of the hall. I can tell which door in the hall someone is walking to with my eyes closed, and certainly know if someone is coming to mine because I'm the last door. Oftentimes my children go downstairs for water early, and I assumed this was the case. I heard the steps coming up the stairs, and once they reached the top, I could tell they were coming to my room. So, laying still, I turned my head to greet what I thought was one of my kids. What happened next is burned in my memory forever. A small head peered around the doorframe and looked directly at me, maybe 3.5 feet from the floor. All I see is what looks like a boy with almost black hair, a disheveled bowl cut, white skin, and black, rough-cut holes for eyes. We were both startled, and it immediately dashed away. To this day, I don't know what launched me forward. My instinct was to either convince myself what I just saw and catch this thing, or find out it was one of my kids and I was hallucinating. It was literally 1.5 seconds between the time I saw it and me leaping to the doorway looking into the hall. The thing just vanished. I went into my daughter's room one by one, and they were all very much asleep. I searched the house basement too, attic, nothing. This house has many stories I could share here, but this one was unlike anything myself or my family have ever experienced. I rarely tell this story now. In fact, today is the 21st anniversary. My husband, then boyfriend, had slept over at my parents' house. He woke early and told me he had to go let his dog out. It was about 6 in the morning, and I knew his brother was home and would let the dog out, but he was adamant. He had to go and let the dog out. So as he was leaving my parents' house, he set off the house alarm. I couldn't get the code to work, and it eventually woke my dad up. My dad stumbled around. He was incoherent. out of sorts. We immediately called an ambulance. My dad was having a rare blood reaction to a medication which we did not know at the time, and was placed under a medical coma, given dialysis, and eventually made a full recovery. The doctors who treated my dad said if we hadn't brought him in when we did, he would have died. My husband lost his father at age 9. He swears up and down his dad was telling him to leave my house, triggering the events that would save my dad's life. I used to work in a casino. One night I was approached by an elderly woman asking about paging someone over the intercom. I tried explaining where to go, but she insisted that I personally walk her to the desk where they can do that. As I walk her through the casino, she started talking to me. She mentioned she was a medium and how her family has always strictly advised her against sharing that information with people. When you work in a casino, you encounter a lot of scammers and odd people. I was polite but tried not to engage her much on the topic. As we kept walking, she said something to me about my sister. I stopped and asked how she knew my sister. She didn't. But she started talking to me at great lengths about my family. At this particular time, my sister was going through a very difficult time in life that was impacting our family as a whole. I was skeptical but curious. As she went on, I was careful to neither confirm or deny anything, but just listen to what she had to say. She went into great detail about how my father, mother, and even I played into the current situation. She even began to become visibly emotional, as if she could feel what my mother was feeling. I was utterly astonished as she told me that I, being the oldest and most diplomatic in my family, needed to be more outspoken with everyone involved. Everything she told me was undeniably accurate and insightful, but then she lifted her focus. She told me about someone I worked with and went into great detail about what this person looked like and how they felt about me. She talked about the dynamic between us and advised me to make caution. At this point, she had lost me. I couldn't think of a single person or relationship in my working life that fit this description. I began to be more skeptical again and reminded her I needed to get back to work and to keep walking towards our destination. She kept talking to me as we walked, and I began to once again find myself astonished as to not just what she was telling me, but also how she would go about it. Her body language, expressions, and emotional energy. As we got closer, she abruptly stopped walking. When I noticed, I did as well and turned back to her. Before I could say anything, she placed her palm at the base of my sternum, above my belly button, just below where my ribcage started. I immediately noticed a physical sensation. I became paralyzed and almost felt like she was stealing the breath from my body. I started to become hyper-aware of my surroundings, the lights and dings from the electronic games, the mass amounts of people walking by, but everything seemed to be in slow motion, or almost as if I was leaving my body. It could have been only a few seconds, it could have been 20 minutes, I don't know. But I felt as if I couldn't breathe. And weakness in my knees. I started to feel like I was on the verge of passing out. Casino security saw this encounter and approached us. When security interrupted us to ask what was going on, it must have startled her because I felt this shockwave through my entire body. She jerked her hand back and started apologizing profusely to me. As soon as she pulled her hand back, I was able to breathe again and gained control back of my body. I was completely freaked out. It must have been visible because security kept asking me if I was okay. I assured them everything was fine, and they walked off. I turned back to the woman, still apologizing, and she said, "If you don't do something about that ulcer, it's going to kill you." I was so freaked out, I told her thanks, but I have to go back to work now, and quickly headed back to my office. Not only was I in a bizarre headspace, but I noticeably was completely void of physical energy. The entire experience was the most profound encounter of my life, and I will never forget those words and physical sensation. I was having a lot of stomach issues at the time, but I was far too scared to get medical verification of an ulcer. I had already previously suspected it and was a potential side effect of the medication I was on at the time. But if that wasn't bizarre enough on its own, it gets even weirder. The encounter happened nearly 10 years ago, and it has sat with me ever since. But recently, I was reflecting back on it. I realized that second part about the coworker that initially made no sense all of a sudden did. The entire situation played out in my life a few years ago. The description of the person and the very specific details were 100% spot on from what was described to me 10 years ago. I even realized that the entire situation was initiated nearly 7 years to the day from the moment this woman described it to me. Not only were there 2 incidents separated by 7 years, but the person she described I hadn't even met yet and was in an entirely different state and company. I don't know what to make of this. I've come here to see what others take on this. I'm open to this type of stuff, but I've always approached these situations skeptically. I'd love to hear what anyone has to say about it. My 6-year-old daughter has always shared things with us. Sometimes creepy, mostly like, what the fuck, how did she know this? I don't know if this belongs here, but would love to hear from others about their experiences. Here are a few examples of my daughter being herself. Age 2. I just found out I was pregnant and had only told my husband. We didn't want to tell my daughter because I had miscarried before and didn't want her to get excited. One evening, we were eating dinner and my daughter turns to me and says, "There's a baby in your belly." My eyes go big and turn to my husband and asked if he told her. He swears he didn't. I asked her if it was a boy or a girl, and she responded, "It's a boy, but I wanted a girl." Sure enough, her baby brother arrived safe and sound 9 months later. The thing that gets me is that she told everyone at daycare. I was a bit nervous in case I miscarried again. Then one day at daycare, she turned to her teacher and said, "There's a baby in your belly, too." She laughed and said, "Nope, that's your mom, not me." However, a week later, her teacher comes to me and says she's pregnant and asked my daughter if it was a boy or a girl. My daughter said girl, and, well, she had a girl. Age 5. My mom has a history of heart attacks. One day she went to the ER thinking she may be having one, but turns out it was an AFib. I was a nervous wreck in the morning, but was fine in the afternoon once I heard she'd be okay. I went to pick up my daughter from school. She was balancing on a table and fell backwards, but was fine. I picked her up and said, "It was more scary than anything, right?" My daughter responded with, "Yeah, but you know what's scarier? Oma dying." I was like, "Why did you say that?" I didn't tell her my mom went to the hospital and we don't see her often. She was like, "I don't know," and went on her merry way. Age 6. Last night, my husband was putting her to bed. He came down and told me right before she fell asleep, she turned to him and said, "Have you ever been on a haunted train?" My husband was like, "No." I asked why. That freaked him out. He showed me a text from 30 minutes earlier from his sister sharing a link to a ghost train Groupon. I told him we should be used to it by now, but sometimes she still gets us. This happened in January of 2019. My stepdad had been in our family's life for 30 years before he was diagnosed with cancer. He never had any biological children, but he had me and my sister, and we couldn't have asked for a better stepdad or granddad for our children. I was with him when he was diagnosed and with him for all his treatments. From the very beginning, there was no question of who would take care of him. It was going to be me. He and my mother were split up at the time, and it just seemed natural that I would be the one to do it because of how close we were, and honestly, I considered it an honor. Unfortunately, his prognosis was not very good, and they gave him less than a year to live. He barely made it 6 months after his diagnosis. He was in the hospital the last 6 days of his life. He had a DNR, and as hard as it was, I didn't argue with him about it. 2 days before he passed, he was in and out of his consciousness and was barely able to talk. His last night, he was able to communicate that he really wanted me to go home and check on the dogs. This was just after 3 o'clock in the morning. I told him I would do that and then I would be right back. He gave a small smile and nodded. It took 20 minutes for me to get home, and 10 minutes after walking through the door, the hospital called and said he had passed. I felt so guilty for leaving until I thought he knew there was already someone with the dogs, but he insisted that I check on them. Perhaps he didn't want me there at the time. I don't know. I still don't know. Now, what I do know is the morning after he passed, I had a missed call from his phone that had been in my purse the whole time he was in the hospital. The call was made at 3:47 a.m., and the voicemail that was left said, "Thank you for everything, sweetheart. I love you." That message was left in my stepdad's perfect, loving voice, not the raspy, out-of-breath, strained voice he had moments before he died. Some people have just said that it may have been an old message that I had just received that morning, but either way, I thought it was amazing. I woke up to my husband's voice this morning saying, "There's something wrong with the front door." It was really loud. I was confused and thought, what could be wrong with the front door? I looked at my phone, and the time showed that he should already be at work. It also sounded more like it was in my head rather than at the front door. The door is pretty far from our bedroom. It was super loud and was clearly my husband's voice. I just thought it must have been a dream or something and went back to sleep. Later, after waking up, I noticed the front door was unlocked. I called my husband to tell him what happened and that he had left the front door unlocked. He said he actually did not go out the front door this morning. He went through the garage and that he was already at work when I heard his voice. I then realized that I had forgotten to check the door last night. It's always a routine to check if the doors are locked before going to bed, but I was so tired last night that I forgot to check. I don't know what it was, but I feel like whatever it was, it's being helpful and protective. Or it could have been my subconscious, since I forgot to check last night. Either way, pretty cool. I left the Airbnb at 1:45 a.m. this morning, July 31st. I was disturbed by paranormal phenomena that was not disclosed in booking. Phenomena included fan light dimming and illuminating, sheets being pulled off of me, the sensation of a weighted presence on the bed settling next to me, and the sheet being pulled and pressed across my face with force, stuff that keeps you up at night. I should have known when I checked in and the room looked okay, but there was an eerie silence, so quiet that I did not hear a bird, and this was a residential area. But being on vacation, I was so happy for the quiet. The oppressive feeling and phenomena kept me from drifting off, and the hypnagogic visuals were fucked up. So I left, and then I reached out at 4:30 a.m. to the host to let him know, "Dude, your place is haunted. Airbnb might like to consider a haunting clause." I did not choose to reserve a haunted room. I was choosing a place to sleep. When I was 7, I woke up in the middle of the night to steal some biscuits or sweeties from the kitchen. Our kitchen is right beside our conservatory, which has big open windows which allow you to glance into the garden. While eating, I heard some chatter from outside. Curious, I went to go peer outside the window. I saw 3 little men in red pointy hats outside in my garden, bickering amongst themselves in a strange language I've never heard before or after. I was so stricken with terror I dared not speak. I ran to my parents' bedroom to tell them about our intruders. My dad was reluctant to believe me, but he could see I was obviously shaken up by something and came downstairs to investigate. They must have heard us coming because by the time we'd gotten to the conservatory, they'd already pegged it and were running through the back gate. My dad caught a glimpse of them too, but he only saw their pointy red hats. I've never seen him look so scared before or in complete disbelief. I decided to write this post now because my father recently brought this up and asked if I remembered. Still, completely baffled by this whole thing. Hey folks, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you haven't subscribed already, please do subscribe and hit the like button, as they're very helpful to my growth here on YouTube. I'm trying to get to 500 subscribers, and I know I can do it with your help. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to me at veronica45stories@gmail.com. Link is also in the description, as are other ways to support the channel if you feel so inclined. If you have a suggestion or simply want to say hello, please leave a comment. I love to hear what you guys have to say. I post as often as I can. I appreciate your patience with me. While it's been a few weeks since I've posted, I've been super busy, but I'm going to try to post more often now. I appreciate you being here more than I could possibly say. And until next time, be good.